It was 6:47 a.m. when the sun hit the glass like it wasn't supposed to. Too sharp, too clean, slicing across the polished marble floor of Lincoln Vista like a warning. The air smelled like money, filtered pine, and silent judgments. Security guard Michael Hanley leaned back in his ergonomic chair, coffee half cold, hand resting near the holster he no longer wore but never forgot, eyes fixed on the front doors like a hawk trained to see shadows where there were none. Lincoln Vista wasn't just any luxury complex. It was the kind of place where silence was law, floors shined like mirrors, and tenants didn't ask for much, except one thing: keep them out. Michael never had to ask who they were. His job wasn't to say it out loud, it was to make sure the message stayed coded, polite, effective. He knew the script. He wrote the script. No noise, no exceptions, no strangers who didn't look like they belonged in the brochure. Every day, the same faces, same nods, same everything. Until today. Until a silhouette appeared beyond the glass, graceful, slow, wrapped in a dark coat, holding a cat carrier with a single white paw pressing against the mesh. A black woman, alone, calm, too calm. She stood there like she owned the place. Not in a loud way, not with defiance, but with that quiet certainty that made Michael's fingers twitch. She didn't press the buzzer. She didn't wave. She just looked at him, through him, like she was waiting for him to catch up to the moment. Something cold slipped down his spine. He stood, walked to the door. His voice came out harder than he intended. "Can I help you?" Her eyes didn't flinch. "I'm here for an inspection." The way she said it didn't sound like a question. Michael scanned her. No ID badge, no uniform, nothing to validate her presence. That meant one thing: a test, a trespass, a threat to the order. And Lincoln Vista didn't tolerate threats, not on his watch. He squared his shoulders, felt that old instinct rise up from years buried under polite professionalism, and said 6 words that would detonate everything that followed. "This entrance isn't for you, ma'am." She didn't move, not a step, not a twitch. The cat inside the carrier let out a small, barely audible sound, a soft mew that echoed strangely against the cold glass. Michael's fingers hovered near the radio clipped to his chest, but he didn't touch it yet. He didn't need backup for this, not for her, not for someone who didn't belong. His eyes narrowed, scanning the tailored coat, the sharp shoes, the smooth skin without makeup, the silence in her posture. No fear. That's what bothered him. Most people in her position would have started explaining themselves by now, fumbling for words, trying to prove they had a reason to stand on this side of the city. But she stood there like gravity bent around her. He hated that. "I'll have to ask you to step back," he said, voice firmer now, shifting the weight of authority onto every syllable. "This is private property. You don't have credentials, you're not on the list, and you're making my residents uncomfortable." He emphasized the last word like it was a loaded weapon. She raised an eyebrow, still not blinking. "Your residents?" she asked quietly, her voice smooth and low, like velvet over a blade. "Do they know you speak for them?" Michael didn't like the question. He didn't like that she wasn't nervous. He didn't like that cat with its strange, icy blue eyes staring through the mesh. "I'm the head of security," he snapped, "and I know what doesn't belong here." There it was, the slip, the edge beneath the uniform, the line that always came out eventually. She heard it. They both did. And still, she didn't leave. "I have business here," she said, and this time the calm had teeth. "And I suggest you contact someone above you before this becomes a problem." Michael smirked. The way they always thought they could pull that card. Call someone, escalate, threaten. Not here. Not in Lincoln Vista. "There is no one above me right now," he said, stepping in front of the door fully, arms folded. "And even if there was, they'd say the same thing. This place isn't open to outside visitors." He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. It hung in the air like smoke from a gun that hadn't fired. "You people." Her lips tightened just a fraction. She looked down at the cat, whispered something, then looked back up like she'd made a decision. Michael thought he'd won. He thought she'd turn and leave like they always did. But instead, she slowly unzipped her coat. A flash of something shimmered underneath. Not a weapon. Worse. A badge. Not government. Not police. A sleek, matte black emblem with a golden triangle and an eagle in flight. Something corporate. Something expensive. Michael leaned closer, squinting, trying to make sense of it. But before he could speak again, she zipped the coat back up, turned her head slightly and said, "You've already failed the test. I'll be seeing you soon, Mr. Hanley." Then she stepped back. Not out of fear, but like a queen choosing not to waste her time on peasants. And as she walked away, he realized, for the first time, he had no idea who she was. But she knew everything about him. The next morning, the lobby of Lincoln Vista was soaked in light, every surface gleaming like a showroom. But Michael Hanley's mood was anything but polished. He kept replaying the encounter in his mind. The woman's voice, the way she said his name like she already had it on file, the badge that didn't belong to any organization he recognized, yet felt far more powerful than anything he'd ever worn. Still, in the sterile quiet of the lobby, surrounded by white orchids, glass railings, and the subtle hum of wealth, he clung to the only thing he thought he still had: control. At 8:02 a.m., a Latina housekeeper wheeled her cart past the desk. Michael didn't greet her. She didn't expect it. At 8:10, a white couple walked in with 2 golden retrievers. Michael smiled, opened the door for them, even bent to pet the dogs. At 8:27, the elevator chimed, and out walked a black delivery man with a stack of vegan meal prep boxes. Michael's hand stopped him. "Check in," he said, even though he never made the others check in. Name, ID, unit number. The man, clearly used to this, didn't argue, just complied. Michael scanned it, nodded once, and waved him off with no thanks. Just another notch in his belt. Another invisible boundary reinforced, because this place, this pristine, untouched zone, had rules. And even when they weren't written, they were enforced. That afternoon, Michael replayed the footage of the woman again, frame by frame, her posture, the cat, the badge, her face. It wasn't that she didn't belong. It was that she looked like she knew she did, in a way that didn't ask permission. That was what made it dangerous. That kind of quiet, confident blackness didn't fit here. It didn't beg. It didn't defer. It didn't apologize. And he hated that most of all. Later, when a new resident came in, a nervous young black man in an expensive coat, Michael stood straighter. "Name?" he asked, tone flat. The man smiled politely. "I'm moving into 14B. My wife set everything up already. I think her name's on the—" "ID," Michael interrupted. "You need to be cleared before you enter." The man blinked. "Seriously, the mover's already—" "I didn't ask about the movers," Michael said. "I asked for your ID." A pause, a moment of confusion, of insult, and that was enough. Michael wanted him to feel it, the reminder, the imbalance, the hint of suspicion baked into every word. Eventually, the man handed over his ID, lips tight. Michael scanned it slowly, made a show of checking a clipboard, even though he didn't need to. Then, as he returned it, he said the same words again, this time quieter, more personal. "This place isn't for everyone." The man stared at him, the meaning settling in like dust. "I know exactly what you mean," he said. Then he walked past, and Michael watched him go, heart beating faster, not out of guilt, but satisfaction. He thought he was restoring order, reinforcing the line. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that every word, every interaction, every subtle dig was already recorded, not just on camera, but in a file, with his name at the top and hers on every page. Let's take a brief pause in the story. If you're still with us, write in the comments where you're listening from. Have you ever experienced something similar, whether in a building, at work, or just walking through a place where you felt like you didn't belong? Your stories matter, and if this one grips you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let's continue. The camera never blinked. Tucked in the far left corner above the imported ficus plant, it captured every detail of the Lincoln Vista lobby with silent precision. Every smirk, every hesitation, every unspoken rule etched into posture and tone. Michael Hanley didn't think about the camera anymore. It had become part of the furniture to him, like the fake smiles and artificial pleasantries he used when white residents passed by. But the footage from yesterday was still saved. Not just on the local drive, but quietly flagged, copied, and transferred. Not by mistake, by intention, by someone who had been watching longer than Michael realized. Behind the reception desk, Sarah, the young assistant manager with pale hair always tied too tightly and a voice soft enough to hide her opinions, had seen the footage. She didn't say anything, not when she saw him block the woman, not when he stepped in front of the door like a gatekeeper from another century, not even when she saw the flash of the badge. But her eyes narrowed, her fingers clicked quietly. She saved the clip, labeled it, and sent it to a secure folder on a cloud drive that didn't belong to building management. Then she kept working like nothing happened. Because Sarah, for all her politeness, had seen too many moments like that to be surprised anymore. But this one felt different. This wasn't a resident mistreated. This wasn't a simple misjudgment. This felt surgical. Like Michael had taken a moment that should have been ordinary and carved it into something cruel, with intent. Meanwhile, Michael kept doing what he thought he did best. At 3:12 p.m., a black teenager with earbuds in walked past the lobby, heading toward the elevator with his mother, a middle-aged woman in a designer coat. Michael didn't ask anyone else for names that day, but he stepped in front of the teenager, held out his hand, and said, "Can you take those out? I need to know you're hearing me." The boy blinked, confused. The mother turned, alarmed. "He lives here," she said. "We just moved in last week." Michael nodded slowly, the kind of nod that wasn't agreement. It was doubt. "Then you won't mind proving it," he said. She stared at him. "You didn't stop the other kids. I saw them come in before us." "I stop anyone who looks out of place," he said, and the way he said out of place made it obvious. The teenager took out his earbuds, silent, humiliated. The mother pulled him by the sleeve and said nothing else, her jaw locked. Michael stood there a little taller, thinking he'd maintained the integrity of the building. But upstairs, in a private unit on the 18th floor, a notification pinged. The video had been received, reviewed, catalogued, and a new file was opened, titled simply Security Breach, Behavioral Pattern, Hanley. The days that followed felt like a slow burn, each one heavier than the last. Michael's routine hadn't changed. He stood by the doors, watched the tenants walk past him, kept an eye on the cameras, the arrival of packages, the delivery men, the occasional guest or visitor. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except for one thing. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the woman with the cat. The one who had dared to defy him without a word of protest, whose silent strength had lingered in his mind like a stain he couldn't scrub out. She wasn't like the others, those who bent, those who apologized, those who looked away when they weren't welcome. She hadn't even flinched, and that's what unsettled him. Her confidence wasn't born of entitlement. It was something darker, more troubling, something that grated against everything he'd been trained to protect. Lincoln Vista wasn't just a building. It was a fortress, a symbol of an ideal. People like her didn't belong here. She didn't fit the mold. But Michael couldn't figure out why. He told himself it was just a momentary lapse, that it would pass, like every other encounter. But when the woman didn't show up the next day, or the day after, Michael found himself watching the door more frequently than usual. He checked the list of tenants again, as if somehow her name had been added in the night. Nothing. The name wasn't on the list. Her image wasn't in the records. No one had registered her as a guest, a resident, or even a visitor. But he couldn't forget the way she had looked at him. He couldn't forget the quiet defiance in her eyes. And then, on the fourth day after their encounter, the woman appeared again. She was standing in front of the building at exactly 2:47 p.m., her cat carrier tucked under her arm like a briefcase. She was alone this time, not a soul in sight. She didn't walk in. She didn't ring the bell. She just stood there, staring at the front doors, like she was waiting for Michael to make the next move. He watched her from the security room. He hesitated for a moment, the same chill creeping up his spine as it had the first time. He told himself it was nothing. He could just ignore her. Maybe she'd go away, but then he saw the glint of something, a reflection in the glass, something that made him turn his head. The camera. It was still recording. It was always recording. Michael pulled up the feed on the monitor, rewinding the footage from earlier. His eyes went to the timestamp, and then he saw it. At precisely 2:42 p.m., the woman had stepped into the frame, no different than anyone else. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, at a distance that was barely noticeable, was a black SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted. The license plate was obscured. Michael's stomach tightened. He zoomed in on the SUV, his fingers brushing over the mouse. There was someone inside. He couldn't see who, but they were watching her. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't even look in their direction. She just waited. And then, just as casually as she had arrived, she turned and walked away, the cat carrier swinging gently by her side. He watched her disappear down the street, out of sight. His heart was pounding in his chest. It was a moment of nothing, of quiet, but the unease gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding, something that he wasn't prepared for. At 4:05 p.m., the phone on his desk rang. He picked it up without thinking. "Security, Hanley," he said. A voice he didn't recognize answered. "This is James, from the property management office. We need to have a discussion." Michael frowned. "About what?" "About your conduct." The voice was cold, formal. "We've received some complaints." "Complaints?" Michael's tone shifted. He didn't like this. Not at all. "What complaints?" "I think you know what complaints we're talking about, Hanley," James said. "It's been flagged. Your actions with residents, particularly your treatment of certain individuals, have come under review." Michael's blood ran cold. "I'm doing my job. I'm keeping the place secure. The thing is, Hanley," James interrupted, "you've been doing more than that. You've been targeting certain people, singling them out for no reason. It's not acceptable, and it's being documented." Michael's mind raced. He wanted to protest, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. He knew exactly what James was talking about. The black teenager, the delivery driver, the woman. He had treated them differently. He had made them feel small. He had forced them to prove they belonged. But he didn't want to admit it. Not to James. Not to anyone. "You're wrong," Michael said, his voice tight. "I've been following the rules. This place isn't meant for everyone." "That's the problem, Hanley," James said, his voice growing colder. "You think it's yours to decide. It's not." There was a long pause. Michael could feel his heart pounding in his chest. "We'll be reviewing your position. You'll be contacted in a few days. Don't make this worse for yourself." The line went dead. He sat there for a moment, staring at the phone. His mind was racing. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain. Things were spiraling out of control. The woman with the cat hadn't just been a random encounter. She was something bigger, something that had set this all in motion. As Michael looked up from his desk, he saw Sarah standing at the door of the security room, her expression unreadable. "You're needed upstairs," she said. "They're waiting for you." Michael stood up, his hands shaking. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he had no choice. He followed her down the hallway, past the pristine walls, the perfectly polished floors. The feeling of unease settled deeper into his gut. He walked into the office of the property manager, a large, sterile room filled with expensive furniture and the smell of fresh paint. At the desk sat a man he had never met before. He was older, dressed in a sharp suit, his hair silvering at the temples. He didn't look up as Michael entered. "Have a seat," the man said, motioning to the chair in front of him. Michael sat down, his palms sweating. The man finally looked up, his gaze piercing. "We've reviewed the footage," he said, "and we've reviewed your actions." Michael said nothing. He felt like he was being suffocated by the weight of the room. "You've crossed a line, Mr. Hanley," the man continued. "You think this place is yours to control, but it's not. You've been profiling people. You've been making judgments based on who they are, not what they've done, and that's not acceptable." Michael opened his mouth to protest, but the man held up a hand. "You'll be terminated, effective immediately," he said. "You're not fit to represent this building, and frankly, you're not fit to be here." Michael's heart raced. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't supposed to happen, not to him, not to someone who had served this building, who had followed the rules, who had kept the order intact. But there was no argument to be made. He had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. As the man stood to leave, Michael felt something inside him snap. He had spent his entire life defending this place. But now, it was gone. It wasn't his anymore. It was hers. The woman with the cat. She had done this. He knew it, and somehow he had been too blind to see it until it was too late. The firing was quick, efficient. Michael Hanley's world crumbled within a span of minutes. One moment, he was sitting in the polished, sterile office, expecting nothing more than a lecture or a reprimand for his behavior. The next, he was handed a termination letter, like a piece of paper, as cold and sharp as the walls surrounding him. The man who had fired him didn't look at him with disgust or pity. No, it was much worse. He looked at him as though he were insignificant, just another cog that had broken in the machine. He was dismissed like a tenant whose lease had expired. No fanfare, no remorse, just a simple, final decision. As Michael stumbled out of the building, the weight of it all slammed into him with the force of a freight train. This had been his life for so long. Lincoln Vista had been his fortress, his purpose. It wasn't just a job, it was everything. It defined who he was, who he had been. The idea that it could be taken from him so easily, so quickly, was more than he could handle. The city outside seemed to mock him as he walked aimlessly down the streets, the glass towers reflecting his defeat. His thoughts were a blur, a series of disconnected images. The woman with the cat, her calm gaze. The SUV watching her from across the street. Her quiet dismissal of him. And now, this. The strange thing was, he wasn't surprised. No, deep down, he had always known this would happen. He had spent too many years creating boundaries that shouldn't have existed. He had spent too long judging people based on their appearance, their race, their status. And now, that very system had turned against him. He had built his own cage, and now it was collapsing around him. That night, as he lay in his small, dimly lit apartment, Michael couldn't stop thinking about her. The woman with the cat. There had been something in her eyes, something that he couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger. It was something much more dangerous, understanding. She knew exactly what he was doing. And worse, she had known what would happen. Michael had been part of a game, and he hadn't even realized the rules had changed. But who was she? Who was this woman? How could she have orchestrated all of this? She was just a visitor, a tenant at best. But she had the power to ruin him, to shatter his world into pieces, and all without raising a finger. All without even speaking. The next day, as he wandered through the city, trying to regain his sense of direction, Michael's phone buzzed. He picked it up without thinking. It was a message from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. "You've lost, Mr. Hanley." The text was simple, direct, but it chilled him to the bone. "You were never meant to win, but you did your part. Now, it's over." The message was signed with a single letter. L. His heart dropped into his stomach. He knew exactly who it was from. The woman with the cat. L. She had done this, but why? Why had she singled him out? What was her goal? He tried calling the number, but it was disconnected almost immediately. No response, no explanation, just silence. He was left with nothing but the message, and the knowledge that he was no longer in control. His mind raced. What had he missed? What piece of the puzzle had he failed to see? He had always thought he was in control. He had always believed that he was the one who decided who belonged in Lincoln Vista and who didn't. He had used his position to uphold the ideals of the building, to maintain the order that was so carefully constructed. But now, he realized that he had been a pawn in someone else's game. A game that he hadn't even known existed. Michael spent the next few days in a haze, lost in thought, trying to piece together what had happened. He couldn't focus. His every move seemed pointless. His every decision felt empty. He had no purpose anymore. He wasn't part of the system he had helped create. And now, he was nothing. Nothing but a man who had lost everything. On the fourth day after his firing, Michael received another message. This time, it was a video. His stomach twisted as he clicked play. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, the woman with the cat. She was standing in front of Lincoln Vista, her face calm, collected, as if nothing had ever happened. The video was taken from a distance, but it was clear. She was speaking to someone off camera. And then, the words she spoke made Michael's blood run cold. "He thinks this is over," she said, her voice soft but unmistakable. "He thinks he's the one who lost. But he doesn't understand yet. This was never about him. This was about something bigger." The video cut off abruptly. Michael stared at the screen, his mind racing. Bigger? What did she mean? The weight of her words hung over him, and he suddenly understood. It wasn't about him. It had never been about him. He had been a tool, a necessary part of something else, something much larger than his own petty views and biases. Michael realized that he was part of a much bigger picture. A picture that was being painted by someone who saw the world differently. Someone who had been watching, waiting, and planning for a long time. And he had fallen into their trap. He wasn't the only one. He had been part of a system that had been exploited, manipulated, twisted for years. And now it was collapsing. The building, the people, everything. The very structure that Michael had believed in was crumbling. His place in it, his power, his position, all of it had been an illusion. The woman with the cat had seen it. She had seen through it, and now she was using him to tear it all down. Michael tried to fight it. He tried to regain his sense of control. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was nothing left to fight. It was over. The world he had known was gone. The system he had protected was broken. And in its place, there was only the aftermath. Only the wreckage of a life that had been built on lies and discrimination. He had been the architect of his own downfall. The woman with the cat had won, and there was nothing Michael could do about it now. His fate had already been sealed. The days after Michael's termination blurred together, each one feeling heavier than the last, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him with relentless force. He moved through life like a shadow, no longer a man with purpose, but a shell of someone who had once believed he controlled everything. Lincoln Vista, once his kingdom, now felt like a distant dream, a mirage that was slipping further and further away. Michael hadn't realized just how much he had been consumed by the life he'd built for himself. The uniform, the rules, the walls he had erected to keep certain people out. It had all been a carefully constructed illusion, an illusion he'd believed in, a world where he was the gatekeeper. He was someone who decided who deserved to enter. And now, in the span of a few days, it had all been ripped away. The woman with the cat had done it. She had taken everything from him without even raising her voice. And somehow, that made it all the worse. The fact that she had done it so effortlessly, so smoothly, without a trace of emotion or anger, it left Michael raw. There was no room for denial now. He had been the problem. He had been the one who had played a part in something so much darker than he had ever realized. The doors of Lincoln Vista weren't just guarded from people like him. They were guarded from people like her. And somehow, Michael had missed it. In the stillness of his apartment, the walls closing in around him, Michael found himself staring at the phone again. The unknown messages had stopped. The haunting videos had ceased. But he knew it wasn't over. He knew that the woman with the cat wasn't done with him. She's just getting started, he thought. And that thought sent a chill through his entire body. It had only taken a few days for him to realize that he wasn't just a casualty of the system he had helped protect. He was now the target of something much bigger. He was just a small piece in a larger game, a game he didn't understand. The more Michael tried to avoid the truth, the more it began to haunt him. His failures weren't just personal. They were part of a larger pattern, one that had been built on years of discrimination, subtle bigotry, and silent control. The walls of Lincoln Vista weren't just walls. They were a symbol of everything that was wrong with the world he had been part of. He had been an enforcer, but he hadn't seen the bigger picture. He hadn't seen how much it had hurt people. The lives, the voices, the faces that had been ignored for so long. The moment he had blocked her, the woman with the cat, had been the moment everything had started unraveling. And in the end, it wasn't about him. It wasn't about his failure. It was about what she had known all along. He was just a cog in a machine that needed to be dismantled. He couldn't escape the thoughts. They gnawed at him, tugging at the edges of his mind. He was constantly questioning everything he had done, his purpose, his role, the things he had said to people, the way he had made them feel, the delivery drivers, the residents, the people like him who had been in positions of power, who had quietly looked down on others. Michael realized now that he had never been the protector he thought he was. He had been the enforcer of a broken system, one that existed to separate, to isolate, to push certain people to the margins while elevating others. He had thought that by following the rules, he was preserving order. But now, the truth hit him. The order had been built on inequality, on fear, on a deeply ingrained belief that people like him deserved more simply because of who they were. The woman with the cat had been a reflection of everything he had failed to see. And it wasn't just her. It was everyone he had ever judged. Everyone he had made feel like they didn't belong. The realization made him sick to his stomach. He couldn't undo the damage he had caused. He couldn't take back the things he had done. And now, he had no idea what his place in the world was anymore. All he had known, all he had ever known, was that he was part of something that had kept people out, kept people like her out. But now, it felt like the walls were closing in on him, trapping him in a cage of his own making. In a fit of frustration, Michael grabbed the phone again and dialed the only number he could think of. Sarah, the assistant manager who had always been polite, always quiet, always in the background. She had been there that day, the day everything had started falling apart. Michael wasn't sure what he was going to say to her, but it felt like there was nothing left to lose. He needed answers. He needed someone to tell him what was going on. It rang twice before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was neutral, but Michael could hear the faintest tremor. She had known something was coming. Sarah, Michael said, his voice tight. I need to know what's going on. Who is she? The woman, the one with the cat. She's behind this, isn't she? Sarah paused. Michael could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. You don't understand, she said softly. It's not just her. It's everything. What do you mean? Michael asked, his frustration rising. What do you know? Who is she? Why did she do this to me? You've been a part of something bigger than you think, Sarah replied, her voice quiet but insistent. It's not about you, Michael. It's about all of us. What are you talking about? This place, Sarah said, almost as if she were speaking to herself. This building, this world we've been living in. It's all been built on lies, built on power and control. It's been here long before you ever came along. And now it's falling apart. She's part of that, and so are you. Michael didn't understand. His mind was spinning, but before he could say anything else, Sarah continued. She's been watching us for a long time, all of us. She knew what we were doing before we even did it, and she's been waiting for the right moment to take it all down. The words hit Michael like a hammer. She's not just a tenant, he whispered. No, Sarah replied. She's not. She's something much bigger than that. She's the one who's been pulling the strings. And she's been building an army. An army? Michael repeated, the word foreign and terrifying in his mind. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" "She's been organizing people, Michael," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People who have been ignored, pushed aside, people who have been kept out. She's been gathering them, preparing them for what comes next. And now it's happening. Everything you thought you knew is coming down. The walls are falling. And you were just part of the system that kept it in place." The weight of Sarah's words hit him harder than anything else. He had been used. He had been part of something much darker than he could have imagined. And now, it was all falling apart. I don't know what to do," Michael said, his voice shaking. "There's nothing you can do," Sarah replied, her tone resigned. "It's over." The phone went dead. Michael sat there stunned. He had thought the woman with the cat had been an enemy, but now he realized that she had been the catalyst. She had been the one to expose everything, and now everything was spiraling out of control. There was no going back. The system was collapsing, and Michael was no longer in control. The ghosts of the past were coming for him, and there was nowhere left to run. Days blurred into each other, time becoming a shifting haze of moments he couldn't grasp, and Michael found himself spiraling deeper into confusion and regret. The phone call with Sarah had left him feeling as though the ground beneath him was dissolving. She had been right about one thing. There was no going back. He had been so sure of his role, so convinced that he was doing what was necessary, that he had never stopped to ask why. But now, faced with the fragments of his own actions, it seemed painfully clear. He had been a part of something that had fed on the very things he had worked so hard to ignore. The systems of power that had propped him up had done the same for so many others. People like him. People who stood in positions of influence, of privilege. Michael couldn't escape the echoing thoughts that gnawed at him constantly. He had walked down a path of exclusion, of racial division, of setting people apart simply because they didn't fit into the framework he had been given. The woman with the cat, the mysterious figure who had disrupted his world, had given him no choice but to confront the system he had been a part of. She had made him face the reality of his own complicity. He thought back to every interaction, to every moment when he had judged someone, when he had made assumptions based on their appearance, their race, their socio-economic status. He had been blind to it. He had thought it was his job, his duty to protect a place, but now he realized he was just the enforcer of an unjust status quo. The feeling of guilt was like a weight in his chest, pressing down, suffocating him. His mind flickered to memories of the residents he had confronted, the ones who had looked at him in frustration, confusion, anger. He had dismissed them. He had made them feel small, powerless. But now, all of that came rushing back with full force. He couldn't erase the damage he had done. The woman with the cat had seen it. She had seen through him. She had known, just like Sarah had suggested, that there were forces at play far beyond his understanding, forces that had been quietly working to dismantle the very system Michael had helped maintain. She had been the catalyst, but the truth was, the walls had been crumbling long before she had ever stepped into the lobby. Michael had been too blind to see it, too consumed by the belief that he was upholding something worthy. But he had been wrong. It was late in the evening when Michael received another message. It was the same unknown number, the same anonymous sender. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. "Are you ready to understand what you've been a part of?" The message was brief. He didn't know what to make of it at first, but it felt like the final piece of a puzzle he had been unable to complete on his own. He had been afraid to confront the truth, afraid to admit that he had been a part of something so deeply flawed. But now, the message seemed like an invitation to take that final step, an invitation to truly understand the damage he had done, not just to himself, but to the people who had been affected by the systems of power he had upheld for so long. Michael sat in his apartment, his mind racing. The silence around him felt suffocating, like he was trapped in a world that no longer made sense. He had lost his job, his sense of purpose, his connection to the very place he had spent years protecting. And now, the only thing left was this message, this cryptic communication that seemed to offer him a chance at redemption, or perhaps a deeper understanding of what it meant to be part of something much larger than himself. He typed a response, his fingers trembling as he wrote, "What do you want from me?" Almost immediately, the response came. "It's not about what I want, Michael. It's about what you're willing to learn. It's about understanding the systems that you've helped create. You've been a part of this for so long, you can't even see it. But I'm giving you the chance to see it, to see what you've done, what you've allowed." Michael's heart raced as he read the message again. It was the truth he had been avoiding. The systems of inequality, of division, of racism. They hadn't just been something that existed outside of him. He had been part of them. And that realization stung more than anything else. He had allowed it. He had turned a blind eye, convinced himself that he was simply doing his job, that he was just following orders, that the rules didn't apply to him in the same way they applied to others. But the truth was, those very rules had been created to keep people in their place, to limit their opportunities, to make them feel small and insignificant. The message continued. This is the cost of silence, the cost of complicity. You've been a part of something that has hurt people for so long, Michael. You've been part of the system that has oppressed them, but now you have a choice. You can continue to pretend like nothing has changed, or you can face the truth. And when you do, maybe you'll understand why it had to come to this. Michael's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just about his job. It wasn't just about losing his position as a guard at Lincoln Vista. This was about everything he had been a part of. This was about the systemic racism that had plagued his world. The divisions that had been created by people like him who had been too comfortable in their own privilege to see the suffering that it caused. He had been a cog in a machine that had perpetuated injustice, and now he had to confront it. He had to see it for what it was. The phone buzzed again. "You're not alone in this. There are others who have been waiting for this moment, for someone to finally see the truth. You have a chance to make things right, Michael. You have a chance to make amends." Michael stared at the screen, the weight of the words sinking in. He felt like he was drowning in them. But at the same time, there was a glimmer of something else, a possibility, a chance to change, to understand, to become part of something that could heal the wounds he had helped create. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to happen overnight. But for the first time in his life, Michael felt like he was finally seeing the world as it really was. And maybe, just maybe, he could help make it better. He typed one final message. "What do I need to do?" The response came almost instantly. "Start by listening. Start by understanding the people you've ignored for so long. They've been waiting for someone to hear their voices. Be that person." Michael put the phone down, the silence in the room now feeling like a pause before something larger, something important. The world was changing, and for the first time, he was ready to change with it. The next morning, Michael walked through the streets of the city, his eyes open in a way they hadn't been before. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. It was time to face the truth, time to see the world through a different lens, time to listen, time to understand, and maybe, just maybe, time to make a difference. Michael stood at the window of his apartment, the city sprawling beneath him, filled with noise and movement. But for him, everything felt still. His gaze was fixed on the streets below, yet his thoughts were far away. The world seemed more distant now, and yet, somehow closer too. Everything felt like it was shifting, like the air itself was changing, bending to some unspoken force. It was a feeling that started the moment he had sent the last message, when he had taken the first step in confronting the truth. But now that he was here, standing at the precipice, he didn't know what the next step looked like. He had always believed that his actions were justifiable, that he had been upholding a sense of order. But as Sarah had pointed out, and as the messages he had received had illuminated, that was a false narrative. The systems that had once seemed so rigid had been built on a foundation of exclusion, not inclusion. He had been blind to it, too caught up in the comfort of the world he had been a part of. But the truth was no longer something he could ignore. Every interaction, every decision he had made was connected to something much larger than his individual choices. His job at Lincoln Vista hadn't just been about security. It had been about maintaining a status quo. It had been about policing the borders of a system that had kept people out, pushed them aside, made them feel small and insignificant. And now, he was forced to reckon with the consequences. The woman with the cat had been the catalyst, but not in the way he had first thought. She hadn't come to disrupt him, to ruin him. She had come to expose him and the world he had helped build. She had held up a mirror, one that forced him to look beyond the surface and see the cracks in the system that had gone unnoticed for so long. He thought about her often, the calmness in her demeanor, the way she had challenged him without ever raising her voice. It had been a quiet defiance, a defiance that had shaken him to his core. And in that moment, he realized how much he had been complicit in perpetuating a system that hurt others. The people he had dismissed, the delivery drivers, the residents, the workers who had come and gone, had always been part of the equation, but he had never bothered to see them for who they were. To him, they had been invisible. It wasn't just about race. It was about the unspoken power dynamics that existed in every corner of the building, in every room where decisions were made. Michael's phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. His heart skipped a beat as he read the words. "There's a meeting tomorrow. It's time to face what we've all ignored." The message was simple, but its meaning was heavy. Michael wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew it was a step forward. Maybe it was a step towards understanding, towards making amends for the things he had done. He wasn't sure if it was possible to undo the damage he had caused, but he had to try. The world he had been part of had caused so much pain, so much division, and now it was up to him to figure out how to make it right. The next morning, Michael arrived at the meeting place, a small community center on the edge of town. It was a stark contrast to the polished luxury of Lincoln Vista, a building that had once seemed so far removed from the world outside. But now, here he was, standing in a room with people whose lives had been shaped by the very system he had upheld. The walls were bare, the chairs simple, the floor worn with years of use. It was humble, but it felt real. It felt honest. Sarah was already there, sitting at the front of the room. She gave him a small nod as he entered, and he took a seat at the back. The other people in the room were quiet, their faces uncertain. Michael didn't know them, but he could feel the weight of their eyes on him. They knew what he had been a part of. They knew the role he had played in perpetuating the divide. But they were here, just as he was, to figure out what came next. After a few moments of silence, a woman stood up from the back of the room. She was tall, with dark skin, and a presence that commanded attention. She didn't speak immediately, but instead looked around the room, making eye contact with each person before finally settling her gaze on Michael. Her eyes were steady, not filled with anger, but something else, something far more powerful. Understanding, resilience. "Why are we here?" she asked, her voice strong but not harsh. "We're here because we've all lived through a system that has pushed us to the margins. We're here because we've all been ignored, silenced, kept out. But we are also here because we're willing to change that. We are here because we're ready to face the reality of our circumstances, to face the systems that have kept us down." The room was silent, everyone listening intently, waiting for her to continue. "I know why you're here," she said, turning to Michael. "I know you're here because you've seen the cracks. You've seen how broken the system is, and now you're asking yourself what comes next. You've come to realize that the world you've been a part of isn't the world you want to keep. But it's not enough to recognize the problem. We need to rebuild. We need to rebuild together." Michael felt a lump form in his throat as the weight of her words sank in. He had been wrong. He had been part of something that wasn't just flawed. It was built to hurt people, built to keep them in their place. And now he had to be part of the solution, part of the change that would bring about something better. The woman continued, her voice softening. "This isn't about guilt. It's not about punishment. It's about understanding. It's about recognizing our shared humanity. It's about acknowledging that we all deserve more than what we've been given, more than the lies we've been told." Michael looked around the room. And for the first time, he saw the faces of those he had overlooked. He saw the pain, the exhaustion, the quiet resilience. These people had lived through things he could never fully understand, but they were here, standing together, ready to change the world. And for the first time, Michael felt like he could be part of that change. It wasn't going to be easy, it wasn't going to be quick, but it was the only way forward. In the days that followed, Michael immersed himself in conversations, in learning, in listening. He started to hear the stories of those who had been pushed aside, who had been made to feel invisible. He listened to their struggles, their pain, their hopes. He learned about the systemic barriers that had been built into every part of society, barriers that he had helped reinforce without ever realizing it. It wasn't just about race. It was about power, about privilege, about the systems that had allowed some to thrive while others were kept in the shadows. And Michael knew that he had to be part of dismantling those systems, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been hurt by them. The work wasn't easy. There were days when he wanted to give up, days when the weight of everything he had done seemed too much to bear. But with every conversation, every act of understanding, every step forward, he felt like he was making a difference. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. Michael knew that the road ahead was long, but he also knew that it was worth walking, because now, for the first time, he understood. He understood the cost of silence, the cost of complicity, and he was determined to make sure that the cost of change wouldn't be the same. As he sat in that community center, surrounded by the people who had taught him so much, Michael realized that it was possible to rebuild, not just the world around him, but the world within him. The work would never be finished, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he was finally on the right path, and for the first time, he felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. And it was only just beginning. The streets felt different now. There was a weight in the air, a heaviness that seemed to follow Michael wherever he went. But this time, it wasn't the oppressive weight of guilt or shame that had once clung to him like a second skin. No, now it was something else, something unfamiliar but hopeful. It was the weight of responsibility, the weight of knowing that change had to come from within, the weight of realizing that the walls he had once helped build were not just made of brick and mortar, but of fear, of prejudice, of systemic injustice. And those walls had to come down. Michael had spent the past few months immersed in conversations, in learning, in confronting everything he had turned a blind eye to. It had been painful. There were times when he wanted to walk away, when the burden of it all felt too heavy, but he couldn't. Not anymore. The people he had hurt, directly and indirectly, deserved more than his silence. They deserved action. They deserved a chance at something better. And so, Michael had started to rebuild, piece by piece, not just the world around him, but the man he had become. He wasn't the same person who had once stood behind the glass doors of Lincoln Vista, casting judgment on those he deemed unworthy of entry. That version of himself felt distant, like a ghost of someone he used to be. No, now he was part of something different. Something that, for the first time, felt like it could truly make a difference. The meetings with the community had continued. They were raw, real, and filled with emotion. Michael had listened, and for the first time, he had truly heard. He had heard the pain of a man who had been denied a job because of his name, the frustration of a woman who had been passed over for a promotion despite her qualifications, the stories of children who had grown up believing they weren't good enough because the world around them told them so. And yet, despite the pain, there was hope. There was a fierce determination to change, to create a world where people didn't have to fight for their humanity, a world where no one had to prove they belonged. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but it was happening. One afternoon, as Michael walked through the city, the sounds of life bustling around him, he saw something that made his heart race. There, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, was the woman with the cat. She was looking directly at him, her gaze unwavering, as if waiting for him to approach. Michael stopped in his tracks. He had thought about her countless times, but now, seeing her in person again, He felt a wave of emotions he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't just a symbol of everything he had done wrong. She was the catalyst for his change. She had forced him to see the truth, to confront the very systems he had helped uphold. And now, standing there, she seemed like a silent judge, measuring the distance between who he had been and who he was becoming. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, the cat carrier in her hand, her presence calm, yet commanding. It was as if she had been waiting for him to catch up to her, to finally understand the weight of the journey they had both been on. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The sounds of the city continued around them, but in that brief silence, Michael felt everything he had learned, everything he had experienced, rise to the surface. Finally, she spoke. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice steady, yet there was a softness in it that Michael hadn't expected. "But it's not enough yet." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it's not enough. I don't think it ever will be, but I'm trying. I'm listening, and I'm learning." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "That's all any of us can do. But the work is hard. It's long. And there will be days when you'll want to give up. But you can't. Not now." Michael swallowed hard. The weight of her words settled deep in his chest, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something deep within him. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It wasn't just shame. It was something more. It was a fire, a determination to keep going, to keep fighting for the change he had been blind to for so long. "I won't give up," he said, his voice steady. "I know I can't. I've seen too much to turn back now." She gave him a small, approving smile. "Good. Because you're not alone in this anymore. We're all in this together. And together, we can bring down the walls." For a long moment, they stood there, just the two of them. There was no need for more words. The understanding between them was clear. She wasn't there to forgive him. She wasn't there to absolve him. She was there to remind him that redemption wasn't a gift. It was something you had to work for. It was something you earned. And that, for Michael, was just the beginning. As they parted ways, Michael felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. The journey he had started was far from over, but he was no longer the man he had been when he first met her. He had been given the chance to change, and he wasn't going to waste it. The woman with the cat had shown him the truth, and in the end, it wasn't just about the walls that had kept people out. It was about the walls that had been built inside himself. Walls of ignorance, of prejudice, of fear. And now, those walls were coming down. Slowly, but surely. It was time to rebuild. Not just the world outside, but the one inside. A world where people didn't have to prove they belonged. Where everyone, regardless of who they were, had a place. And Michael knew that, no matter how long it took, he would be part of that change, one step at a time. And with that, Michael walked on, the city sprawling before him, its walls no longer as imposing as they once seemed. Thank you for following the story through to the end. We would love to hear your thoughts on this journey. What do you think about the themes of growth, understanding, and redemption? Have you ever experienced or witnessed racism in your life? Your stories matter to us, and they are incredibly important. We truly appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this community. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. We always love hearing from you. Have a wonderful day ahead, and feel free to drop a phrase related to the story in the comments, so we know you're with us until the end.